The Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain stands as one of the most transformative and blood-soaked periods in British history. It was a time marked by violence, migration, cultural upheaval, and the gradual fall of Roman Britain, which led to the birth of early medieval England. To understand the scope of this event, we must delve deep into the shadows of the 5th and 6th centuries, a dark era where tides of invaders changed the face of an entire island. The fall of Roman Britain, a world in ruin. Before the Anglo-Saxon invasion, Britain was part of the vast Roman Empire. For nearly 400 years, the Roman presence had introduced order, roads, cities, and fortifications. By the early 5th century, however, the once mighty Roman Empire was in decline, weakened by internal strife and relentless attacks from barbarian tribes on the continent. The island of Britain, once a prized province, had become a distant and vulnerable outpost. In AD 410, the Emperor Honorius famously sent a message to the Roman citizens of Britain: the empire could no longer defend them. Roman legions, which had once protected the borders of Britain, were called back to defend the heartlands of the empire. Without the Roman military presence, Britain was left exposed to attacks from seafaring raiders, tribes like the Picts from the north, the Irish from the west, and most ominously, the Germanic tribes from across the North Sea. It is in this power vacuum that the Anglo-Saxon invasions took root. The arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, war bands from across the sea. The Anglo-Saxon invaders were not a single, unified group but a collection of tribes originating from what is now modern-day Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. These tribes, primarily the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, were seafaring warriors, hungry for new land and riches. Initially, it is believed that some of these Germanic warriors were invited to Britain. According to legend, a British warlord named Vortigern, desperate to defend his kingdom against Pictish and Irish raids, invited Saxon mercenaries to help fight his enemies. Among these mercenaries were two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, who led their men to British shores in the mid-5th century. But what started as a partnership quickly spiraled into betrayal and conquest. The Saxon mercenaries soon realized that the fertile lands of Britain were ripe for the taking. They began to rebel against their British employers, and the initial trickle of Germanic warriors grew into a flood of invaders. Entire communities of Anglo-Saxon families began crossing the North Sea, settling on the eastern and southern shores of Britain. A land in flames, the destruction of Roman Britain. As the Anglo-Saxons established themselves, Britain descended into chaos. The once great Roman towns and cities were besieged, abandoned, or reduced to ruins. Archaeological evidence from this period paints a grim picture. In many Roman settlements, layers of ash and rubble show the destruction wrought by the invading tribes. Towns like London, Londinium, once bustling with Roman culture and trade, fell into decay as the Roman way of life collapsed. The native Britons were caught in a desperate struggle for survival. Lacking the centralized power and military strength they once enjoyed under Roman rule, many Britons fled to the hills, retreated into the mountains of Wales, or escaped to the western regions like Cornwall. Others were enslaved or slaughtered by the invading Anglo-Saxons. One of the darkest elements of the Anglo-Saxon invasion was the cultural erasure of Roman Britain. As the invaders pushed further inland, Roman institutions, language, and Christianity were gradually erased, replaced by the pagan customs, languages, and traditions of the Anglo-Saxon tribes. Roman Britain, with its baths, villas, and stone walls, was fading into a ghost of the past. The battle for the soul of Britain, resistance and retaliation. Despite the onslaught, the Britons did not go down without a fight. Stories of fierce resistance by British leaders like Ambrosius Aurelianus and the legendary King Arthur, though his historical existence is debated, tell of a determined but ultimately doomed struggle to reclaim the land from the Anglo-Saxons. Ambrosius Aurelianus, believed to be one of the last remnants of the Roman aristocracy, led a series of counterattacks against the invaders. He is often associated with the famous Battle of Mount Badon, a significant victory where, according to later chroniclers, the Britons managed to halt the Saxon advance for a time. However, this was only a temporary reprieve. Over the next century, the Anglo-Saxons continued their relentless push into British territory. As the Anglo-Saxon grip tightened, the Britons who remained were gradually pushed to the peripheries of the island, the mountains of Wales, the rugged lands of Scotland, and the remote corners of Cornwall. In these regions, British identity survived, but in the heartlands of England, the Anglo-Saxon tribes were now in control. The formation of Anglo-Saxon England, kingdoms rise from bloodshed. By the 6th and 7th centuries, the Anglo-Saxon invaders had settled much of what is now England, carving the land into a patchwork of competing kingdoms. The Angles established the powerful kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, while the Saxons dominated in Wessex, Sussex, and Essex. The Jutes, a smaller group, settled primarily in Kent. These kingdoms were fiercely competitive, often warring with each other for dominance. The constant warfare between these new Anglo-Saxon states further deepened the sense of chaos and instability. Yet, it was from this turbulent environment that a new English identity began to emerge. The Anglo-Saxons brought with them their own languages, which would eventually evolve into Old English. They also brought their pagan beliefs, though in time, Christian missionaries from Ireland and the European continent would reintroduce Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons. The fusion of Anglo-Saxon culture with the remnants of Roman Britain created a new and distinct society, one that would lay the foundations for the England we recognize today. The Dark Legacy, a nation forged in violence, the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain was not just a simple migration, it was a violent, prolonged, and transformative process that fundamentally altered the course of British history. The island, once a Roman province with grand cities and a sophisticated culture, was reduced to a fractured, war-torn land ruled by competing tribes. The Britons, who had once been citizens of the Roman Empire, were now a subjugated and displaced people, clinging to survival in the farthest corners of the island. Their culture, language, and way of life were largely erased in the areas where the Anglo-Saxons held sway. But out of this darkness emerged the early roots of the English nation. The Anglo-Saxons, though invaders and conquerors, brought with them a new language, new traditions, and new ideas that would shape the future of the island. They laid the groundwork for the medieval kingdoms that would eventually unite into England. The Anglo-Saxon invasion is often remembered as a period of violence and destruction, but it was also a time of profound transformation. From the ashes of Roman Britain, a new society emerged, one that would eventually rise to power, but not without paying a heavy price in blood. The shadows of that violent past continue to linger over Britain's history, reminding us that the creation of nations is often forged in the fires of war.